The 1960s and 1970s produced some of the strangest songs ever to climb the charts. Tracks built on fictional bands, nonsense lyrics, and concepts nobody could have predicted would work. Most of the artists behind them never had another hit. Here are 15 weird one-hit wonders from the 60s and 70s that you didn't know. Number 15, Disco Duck by Rick Dees and his Cast of Idiots. Rick Dees released Disco Duck in 1976, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that October, staying within the top 10 for 10 consecutive weeks, despite the disco establishment largely treating it as a joke at the genre's expense. Dees was a Memphis radio disc jockey at the time, working at WMP, and the song was built around a duck-voiced narrator describing himself transforming uncontrollably into a disco dancer against his own will, complete with exaggerated quacking sound effects layered throughout the entire track from beginning to end. The song was directly inspired by an earlier novelty record called The Duck, released back in 1960, and Dees recorded his version largely as a joke intended purely for his own local radio show, with no serious expectation of national distribution. A small regional label picked it up, and from there it found its way to a much wider release that eventually caught fire nationally in a way nobody involved had anticipated. It became one of the most recognizable novelty hits of the entire disco era, despite, or quite possibly because of, how deliberately and unapologetically absurd it was. Dees actually lost his radio job at WMP over a contractual dispute related to the unexpected success of the record, which led him to relocate to a bigger market. He went on to a long and successful career in radio and television, eventually hosting a widely syndicated countdown show for decades, but he never had another hit single anywhere near the commercial impact of a duck-voiced disco parody that had started as a private joke for his own listeners. Number 14, Judy in Disguise with Glasses by John Fred and his Playboy Band. John Fred and his Playboy Band released Judy in Disguise in late 1967, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January of 1968. The song was directly inspired by the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which had come out a few months earlier, but where the Beatles leaned into psychedelic imagery, John Fred built something closer to a lounge pop novelty track with lyrics that made almost no literal sense from line to line. The song describes a woman in increasingly absurd visual terms, disguised with glasses, wearing things that don't fit together logically, presented with a kind of winking humor that audiences in 1967 and 1968 clearly found charming. It topped the charts for 2 weeks. John Fred never came close to replicating that success, and the song remains one of the strangest number 1 records of the entire decade, specifically because it was conceived as a deliberate parody of one of the most serious psychedelic songs the Beatles ever wrote. Judy in the sky. Hey, that's what you call. Number 13, Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett and the Crypt Kickers. He did the Monster Mash. Bobby Boris Pickett released Monster Mash in 1962, and while that places its original release just outside the 1960s window most people associate with it, the song's massive cultural life through the rest of the decade and its multiple chart re-entries in 1970 and 1973 make it inseparable from both eras. It reached number 1 in October 1962 and returned to the Billboard charts twice more in the years that followed. It was a graveyard smash. Pickett wrote the song as a way to cash in on the popularity of monster movies and dance crazes simultaneously, doing a deliberately exaggerated Boris Karloff impression throughout. He had no expectation that it would become a genuine commercial phenomenon. It did, and it became one of the most enduring novelty songs ever recorded. But Pickett's career as a hitmaker essentially began and ended with a Halloween-themed parody record built on impersonating a horror movie actor. He did the Monster Mash. Number 12, In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly. Iron Butterfly released In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida in 1968, and the full album version ran an extraordinary 17 minutes, taking up the entire second side of the LP. an almost unprecedented commitment for a rock record of that era. It became one of the best-selling albums of the year despite, or perhaps partly because of, its sheer length and the fact that the bulk of the track was built around an extended drum solo by Ron Bushy and a hypnotic, repetitive organ riff played by Doug Ingle that never really resolved itself in any conventional pop song sense. The title itself is famously the result of Ingle slurring the phrase, "in the Garden of Eden," while genuinely intoxicated during an early demo recording session, and the band simply decided to keep the slurred version exactly as he had said it, because it sounded mysterious, foreign, and uniquely theirs. A 2-minute single edit was also released, stripped of nearly everything that had made the album version interesting, and it went almost completely unnoticed on radio, which created an unusual situation where the band was enormously successful on album sales charts while being almost invisible as a singles act. They never produced anything close to that level of success again, despite the album's massive and lasting sales, because the specific formula that had worked so well, stretched across 17 minutes, simply could not be compressed into a conventional 3-minute radio format without losing whatever had made it strange and compelling in the first place. Number 11. Alley Oop by the Hollywood Argyles. The Hollywood Argyles released Alley Oop in 1960, putting it just on the edge of the decade, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that summer. The song was based on the newspaper comic strip of the same name, about a caveman from the prehistoric kingdom of Mu, and the band's lineup was essentially assembled specifically to record this one single rather than functioning as an ongoing creative unit. The recording session itself has become legendary among music historians for its chaos, reportedly assembled quickly with whoever happened to be available, including future Beach Boys collaborator Gary Paxton on lead vocals. The song's premise, built entirely around a comic strip caveman, made it one of the stranger #1 records to emerge from the early 1960s, and the loosely organized group behind it never had anything resembling a second hit. Number 10. Dominique by The Singing Nun. Janine Deckers, performing under the name Sur Sourire, or The Singing Nun, released Dominique in 1963, and it became the first and only Belgian recording to reach number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, a chart position it held for 4 weeks that December. Deckers was an actual Dominican nun living in a convent in Belgium, and the French language song was a tribute to Saint Dominic, the Castilian Catholic priest who founded the Dominican religious order she belonged to. The song was a commercial sensation across 11 different countries and won the Grammy Award for Best Gospel or Other Religious Recording in 1964, a genuinely unusual achievement for an actual member of a religious order singing about her own order's founder. The strangeness of the story extends well beyond the song itself and the unusual premise of a working nun topping international pop charts. Deckers eventually left her convent in the years that followed, attempted a secular singing career under her own name with very little commercial success, and struggled significantly with the fact that the substantial royalties generated by Dominique had largely been retained by her religious order rather than passed along to her personally as an individual. Her later attempts to build any kind of sustainable career or financial stability repeatedly failed. She died in 1985 in a suicide pact alongside her close companion, Annie Payshirt, following years of serious financial hardship and depression. A genuine Catholic nun topping the American pop charts with a devotional French song about her own order's founder remains one of the most unusual and ultimately tragic chart-topping stories of the entire decade. Number 9. Spirit in the Sky by Norman Greenbaum. Norman Greenbaum released Spirit in the Sky in late 1969, and it became a massive hit in early 1970, reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and eventually selling over 2 million copies in the United States alone. What makes the song genuinely strange is the combination of elements involved. A heavily distorted, fuzz-toned guitar riff that Greenbaum built himself by attaching a custom fuzz circuit to his guitar specifically to get a sound he hadn't heard anywhere else, paired with explicitly religious lyrics about salvation, going to heaven, and standing before a friend named Jesus, written by a man who was Jewish and had no particular religious agenda or affiliation behind writing the song. Greenbaum has explained in interviews over the years that he was simply trying to write a gospel-style song after watching a country singer perform a religious number on a television program and being struck by how effective that style of direct, simple religious imagery was as songwriting material, regardless of his own personal beliefs. The fuzz guitar element came specifically from his desire to have the track stand out sonically from everything else on the radio at the time, giving it a heavier, more aggressive edge than the gentle subject matter might otherwise suggest. The combination of heavy, psychedelic-leaning rock production with completely straightforward spiritual lyrics produced something genuinely unusual for its commercial moment, and the song has gone on to an extraordinarily long life in films, television commercials, and other media for decades afterward. Greenbaum never had another hit of comparable size, despite a long subsequent career in music, and has spoken candidly about the strange experience of being permanently associated with a religious anthem he wrote with no religious intention behind it. Number 8. Kung Fu Fighting by Carl Douglas.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Carl Douglas released Kung Fu Fighting in 1974, and it became one of the best-selling singles of the entire decade, eventually moving over 11 million copies worldwide and reaching number 1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom. The genuinely strange part of the story is that the song was originally recorded as a quick throwaway B-side, intended only to support a completely different single called I Want to Give You My Everything, which producer Bidu had actually believed was the stronger commercial prospect of the two tracks. The recording session for Kung Fu Fighting reportedly took only about 10 minutes from start to finish, an afterthought tacked onto a studio session that had been booked and paid for with an entirely different song in mind. It capitalized directly on the global kung fu film craze that Bruce Lee's movies, along with the American television series Kung Fu, had ignited across Western pop culture earlier that decade, complete with sound effects meant to evoke martial arts combat woven throughout the recording. Douglas never came close to matching that success again, despite a long subsequent recording career, and the song went on to become one of the most licensed and reused novelty tracks in film, television, and advertising history for decades afterward, vastly outliving the 10-minute studio session that had produced it almost as an afterthought.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Number 7. Convoy by C.W. McCall. C.W. McCall released Convoy in late 1975, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in January 1976, becoming one of the most distinctive number 1 songs of the entire decade. The entire track is spoken word narration delivered over a country backing track, built specifically around the Citizens Band radio slang that had exploded in popularity among American truckers and amateur radio enthusiasts during that exact period. The lyrics are dense with trucker jargon, references to Smokies, Choke and Chokers, and a long list of CB handle names that would have meant almost nothing to listeners outside that specific subculture, which made the song's enormous mainstream crossover success genuinely surprising to industry observers at the time. What very few listeners realized then, and what still surprises people who learn about it today, was that C.W. McCall was not an actual trucker, CB radio enthusiast, or even a career musician by trade. He was a fictional character created by advertising executive Bill Fries, originally developed for a series of regional television commercials for a Midwestern bread company called Old Homebread in the early 1970s. The commercials proved popular enough on their own that Fries, working with composer Chip Davis, decided to spin the character off into an actual recording career, and Convoy became the unexpected commercial peak of that entire venture. McCall never had another major national hit of comparable size, and the character was eventually retired from active use altogether, But for one strange and improbable moment, a character invented to sell bread on local television topped the national music charts with a song built entirely around niche trucking radio slang that most of the country had to learn from the song itself. Number 6. The Streak by Ray Stevens. Ray Stevens released The Streak in early 1974, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that May, becoming one of the most successful novelty records of the entire decade. The song was a direct response to the streaking fad that had genuinely swept American college campuses, sporting events, and even televised broadcasts during that exact period. Built as a comedic mock news report narrative about a fictional reporter trying and repeatedly failing to interview the increasingly exasperated wife of a man who keeps running naked through public spaces in their town. Stevens delivers the entire song in an exaggerated, rapid-fire comedic radio announcer voice, complete with sound effects, sudden interruptions, and a repeated refrain warning bystanders not to look directly at the streaker as he passes by. It captured a genuinely strange and short-lived cultural moment with enough comic timing and structural cleverness to become a massive commercial hit, reportedly selling over 5 million copies. But the very specific cultural fad it was built around faded almost as quickly as it had appeared on the national scene. And Stevens, despite a long and prolific career in novelty and comedy music that continued for decades afterward, never had another single approach that level of commercial success again. Number 5. The band was made up of Mexican-American musicians from Saginaw, Michigan, and the lead singer performed exclusively under the name Just the Punctuation Mark, with no actual legal name ever officially confirmed for public use during the band's active years, which was already a strange enough premise before anyone heard a single note of the actual song. The track was recorded extremely cheaply on a tiny, independent label, reportedly assembled in the living room of the band's manager rather than a proper recording studio, and built around a wheezing Vox Continental organ riff played by Frank Rodriguez that became one of the most instantly recognizable sounds to come out of the entire garage rock movement. The lyrics are simple and almost hypnotically repetitive, built around the narrator's claim that he will cry 96 tears after a breakup, a number specific enough to feel oddly mathematical for a pop song. The band's mysterious question mark persona, the murky low-budget production values, and that unmistakable organ tone combined into something that essentially helped define an entire subgenre of 1960s garage rock almost by accident. The band toured and recorded for several more years afterward, but never came anywhere close to that level of chart success again. Number 4, Eggplant That Ate Chicago by Dr. West's Medicine Show and Junk Band. Dr. West's Medicine Show and Junk Band released The Eggplant That Ate Chicago in 1966, and it reached number 22 on the Billboard Hot 100. A genuine hit by any measure, built entirely around a premise involving a giant vegetable terrorizing a major American city. The song combined jug band instrumentation with a deliberately ridiculous narrative concept that fit perfectly into the novelty record tradition of the era. You better watch out for the eggplant. The band itself was largely a vehicle for songwriter Norman Greenbaum, who would go on to a much bigger hit a few years later with an entirely different group identity. Dr. West's Medicine Show never produced another charting single, and the bizarre image of a vegetable consuming an entire city remains one of the stranger commercial concepts to reach the top 30 during the decade. Number 3, Mother-in-Law by Ernie K. Doe. Ernie K. Doe released Mother-in-Law in 1961, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that May, making it one of the most successful records to come out of the entire New Orleans R&B scene during that period and a genuine landmark for the city's songwriting and production talent. The song was written and produced by Alan Toussaint, who would go on to become one of the most influential figures in New Orleans music for the rest of the century, and its concept, a husband's exaggerated comedic complaints about his wife's overbearing mother interfering in their marriage, was simple, universally relatable, and immediately catchy, anchored by a memorable low-bass vocal hook, delivered by a separate singer named Benny Spellman, rather than Kado himself. Kado became something of a genuine New Orleans celebrity off the strength of the single's national success, eventually opening a bar in the city's Treme neighborhood that he ran for decades afterward, and where he frequently referred to himself, half jokingly and half in complete earnest, as the Emperor of the Universe. The bar became a beloved local institution, filled with memorabilia and portraits celebrating his own legacy, and Kado remained a fixture of New Orleans cultural life long after his recording career had effectively ended commercially. He never had another national hit of comparable size, but the strange comedic premise of the original song, combined with his later eccentric and beloved local fame as a self-declared emperor running a neighborhood bar, gave the entire story an unusual and genuinely charming second life well beyond the original 1961 recording. Number 2, Indiana Wants Me by R. Dean Taylor. R. Dean Taylor released Indiana Wants Me in 1970, and it reached the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 that year, eventually peaking at number 5 and becoming a substantial international hit as well, charting strongly in the UK and Canada's. The song tells the story of a fugitive on the run from the law after committing murder in defense of his girlfriend's honor. Built with elaborate sound effects including police sirens, gunfire, and an actual police bullhorn voice demanding the narrator's surrender woven directly into the structure of the recording itself, giving the entire single an almost cinematic quality that was unusual for a mainstream pop record of that era. Taylor was a Canadian songwriter and producer who had spent most of his career working primarily behind the scenes at Motown Records, writing and producing material for other artists on the label rather than recording under his own name, and Indiana Wants Me was something of a genuine outlier in his career, a dramatic narrative single-delivered as his own performance rather than written for someone else to sing. The elaborate production, including those police siren and bullhorn effects that played out over radio stations across the country, exactly as written into the recording, made it one of the more theatrically ambitious and strange-sounding hits of the early 1970s, closer in spirit to a radio drama than a conventional pop song. Taylor continued working as a producer and songwriter at Motown for years afterward, but he never had another single under his own name reach that level of commercial success again. Number 1, Na Na Hey Hey, Kiss Him Goodbye by Steam. Steam released Na Na Hey Hey Kiss Him Goodbye in 1969, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 that December, becoming one of the most recognizable songs in American popular culture in the decades that followed. The strangest part of the story is that Steam did not actually exist as a real, functioning band when the song was originally recorded. It was assembled by songwriters Paul Leka, Gary DiCarlo, and Dale Frashuer essentially as a studio experiment, intended primarily as a B-side, with the now famous Na Na Na, Hey 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 Goodbye refrain originally written as nothing more than a temporary placeholder chorus. The songwriters fully intended to go back and write actual finished lyrics for that section before the song was released, but studio time ran out. The label needed material, and the placeholder version simply went out as recorded. The fictional band name Steam was invented afterward, essentially out of necessity, once the record label needed something concrete to print on the physical record label and the promotional materials being prepared for radio stations. When the song became a massive, completely unexpected commercial hit, an actual touring band had to be hastily assembled to go out and perform live under the Steam name, made up of musicians who had nothing whatsoever to do with the original studio recording session that had produced the hit in the first place. The song has gone on to an extraordinarily long second life as a stadium and arena chant played at sporting events around the world, sung by crowds of people who have almost certainly never heard the original recording in full and have no idea about the studio accident that created it. Steam itself never had anything resembling a second hit, having technically not existed as an actual performing band until well after their only hit was already climbing toward #1 on the charts. These songs prove that some of the biggest hits of the 60s and 70s came from the strangest possible circumstances: fictional bands, slurred lyrics, and 10-minute recording sessions that nobody expected to matter. If you enjoyed taking this trip back, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. There is plenty more nostalgia waiting for you.